In Kings, if you notice the first two verses of 2 Kings 7, I'm just going to read those first two verses and then we're going to go back to chapter 6. But I just want to set the scene here. In verse 1 of chapter 7, it says, Then Elisha said, Hear you the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, Tomorrow about this time a measure of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Then a Lord on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God and said, Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And he said, Behold, you shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat thereof. Well, that is quite a statement. What in the world is that all about? It sounds like Elisha is a commodities broker. He's talking about what the price of of flour and what was the other thing you mentioned? Barley will be. What in the world? Why do we have a prophet of God talking about forecasting the price of flour? Is he a commodities broker? What is he? Is he talking about futures? And by the way, the price that he's mentioning for what a measure of fine flour and barley will be sounds about right for that time. And so why is that so extraordinary? And why is there a person that is skeptical and says if the windows of heaven will open, that will never be? Well, to understand that, we need to go to chapter 6. So let's back up one chapter. I don't normally do this where I start in one chapter and then go back, but today I thought we would do it this way. So let me give you some background and remind you of where we are. We have to go. Some of you weren't here when we studied Solomon, King Solomon, but when King Solomon died, we see a united Israel that Solomon had inherited from his father David. But when Solomon died, his son Rehoboam becomes king, and then we have what's called a divided kingdom. So what are they called? Does anybody remember what they're called? We have the what kingdom and the what kingdom?
Judea and Israel.
Okay. And it also could be referred to geographically as what? Southern and northern. And so does anybody remember what the capital of the southern kingdom was called?
Is that Jerusalem?
Yeah, we got Jerusalem.
Okay.
That's right.
I got the easy one.
That's right. That's right. And so the harder one would be, what is the capital of the northern kingdom? It's Samaria. So we have, and we're going to be talking about Samaria today. That's going to be the focus of our story. And so we have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and this is a divided country. By the way, anybody just out of curiosity remember how many tribes are in? Okay, how many are in the southern kingdom?
I know it's 10 and 2.
Okay, it's 10 and 2. You're right. So how many are in the southern?
2, right?
That's right. And 10 in the northern. So, so that kind of gives a little perspective here. So let's read verses 24 and 25 of chapter 6. It says, It came to pass after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his host and went up and besieged Samaria. Okay, what is Samaria? What is the capital of? Of the what kingdom? Northern kingdom. Okay, keep that in mind. And verse 25, there was a great famine in Samaria, and behold, they besieged it until a donkey's head was sold for, and I'm just going to mention a price, $500, okay? And the fourth part of a cab of dove's poop, I'm just going to say it that way, was about $50, okay? So, wow, interesting. So did you pick up in verse 24 what was the scene here? We have the capital city of the northern kingdom, Samaria, is being besieged or surrounded by Ben-Hadad's Syria.
I think it says Aaron.
Okay, that's fine.
It's
That's fine. Yeah,
Same geographic.
yeah, same, that's right. So this surrounding would create a major shortage inside the city. Remember back some months ago when we talked about the walls of Jericho? It's been some time ago, earlier this year, we talked about that. And when we talked about the walls, there was an outer wall and an inner wall. Remember that? And there was significance to the miracle that God did with those walls and how one fell flat and all. It was a really neat story, but I won't go into too much in that. But These walls were made to protect the cities, obviously, and usually, it's very fortified, and this is the capital city, and of course, who would live in the capital city? You want to protect him, so these walls were definitely protecting the city. We mentioned also that there are gates in these walls, and we've also talked about in recent days about what happens inside those gates. The king would sit inside those gates. A lot of activity. The story of Ruth and Boaz happened inside a gate. So there's a lot of things that go on in these entrances and exits of the city. While the walls are a good thing for a city, they can also they can work against you. Because in this story, you have an army that has besieged it, and now there's only really so many ways to get in and get out, because you have walls that protect people from getting in, but in this case, they can also only give you so many ways to get out. So, and you got to remember that a lot of things come inside these walls. These cities were densely populated. I don't know how many people. I should have looked that up. This happens to me every time when I teach. I think of a question I should have looked up, like what was the population of Samaria? I really don't know, and I don't know why that didn't pop in my head. But we do know this. When we looked at the walls of Jericho, and we remember we did a circumference of how large the walls were on the height and the inner wall and outer wall, but we also we looked at the circumference. It really wasn't as big as we thought. If I remember, it was less than 2 miles, something like that. So that tells us that the cities themselves, they may have a lot of people in them, but there's not a lot of space in them. It's kind of like New York City, just people stacked on top. Or I'd say like Asian cities. If you look at places like Tokyo, property in Japan's really expensive. So like to own as much property as I have, you'd have to be a very wealthy man, and I don't even own that much. So these cities wouldn't have a lot of room. There wouldn't be, for instance, there would be no fields. Okay, why is that important? Well, let's think about it. If you have a large city, you could take any large city. In Nashville, they don't grow their food in Nashville. Where does it come from? Outside the city. They don't have cows in Nashville. Their beef is brought in the gates of the city. Same situation here. Any supplies that you would need would have to come through the gates. And if a city is being surrounded, then logistically, there's nothing coming in. So all they have is what is stored and what people have. Maybe they knew that they were going to be besieged and it was like snow around here and everybody got bread and milk. I don't know. But the bottom line is whatever they had inside the city was all they had. There was nothing else going to be coming in. Also, water, by the way. A lot of the water was brought in through. They wouldn't have only had so much water inside the city. So you could also mention free trade. We know that trade happened back and forth from inside the city. Do you have the picture? We can relate to this somewhat because most of us, all of us, lived through COVID. We saw what happens when supply chains are interrupted. I saw it from a different perspective because I don't know if, and I'm sure Mickey and some of the others maybe, was there anybody that was working during COVID that was considered deemed essential? Okay, and I was too, and it was an odd time to work. It was strange, but at the same time, it was awesome for a guy like me. There was no rush hour.
Yeah.
You could get through anywhere, and in great time. And it was, for a UPS guy, it was wonderful. So, but it was strange. It was really strange. So we saw during COVID, you remember going to the grocery stores, of course, toilet paper. Well, what toilet paper went really quick. You don't think about toilet paper going quick, but then you think about, people use a lot of toilet paper when they're at work, at restaurants, at different venues. Now they're having to use all their toilet paper at home. So you're normally using toilet paper that is provided by vendors, like that ship to them, or Centos, or places like that, where toilet paper is being delivered. But now everybody's having to get their toilet paper from one source. Grocery stores couldn't handle it. Walmart couldn't handle it. And so it created a great strain. I remember one of the things that was interesting to me. During COVID, of course, you saw shelves just empty, like you've never seen shelves empty. I remember one day wanting to buy some soup. And you learned real quick during COVID which soups are not popular.
That's all of that.
There were certain soups people don't like. Of course, you realize people do love potato soup. They do love chicken noodle. They do love tomato. Split pea, not so much. There were just certain soups that were available. And so you learned what really do people eat. And COVID was an interesting time. So magnify, though, what we experienced in COVID 50 times here. Because what we just read in chapter 7, we saw that a donkey's head sold for $500. What do you do with a donkey's head?
Soup.
I guess.
They do with goat.
Let's not forget something, though. A donkey's head would be unclean.
I was gonna say, it's
And obviously at this point it didn't matter. People are eating poop. They're paying $50 for a pint of poop. I always tell Tommy, last night her class had a social, and they were having fish fry, and Tommy does not like seafood, and I do. And I always tell her, I'm like, well, you would eat seafood if you had nothing else there. She denies. She would never eat it. I'm like, yeah, you say that. You would eat it if you were hungry enough. These people are eating poop, okay?
Is this the one, this is the one where they're actually eating their children?
You want to get into that? Yeah, here we go. Yeah, I'm glad. Good segue. If you didn't think that was troubling enough, that they're eating poop, and by the way, spending a day's wage to get a pint of poop, $500 for a donkey's head, you would have had to have been very wealthy to afford a donkey's head. So it's much worse than you think. Thanks, Budge. Let's read this verse 26 through 20. No, great segue. Perfect timing. As the king, this is the king of Israel, was passing by the wall. Okay, he's out there doing what kings would do, what a politician would do, going out and seeing the plight of his people. He passes by on the wall. There cries a woman unto him, saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And he said, "If the Lord doesn't help you, how shall I help you? Out of the barn floor of the winepress?" And the king said unto her, "What ails you?" And she answered, "This woman said unto me, Give me your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son and did eat him. And I said to her on the next day, Give your son that we may eat him. And she hath hid her son. And it came to pass when the king heard the words of the woman, that he tore his clothes, and he passed by upon the wall. And the people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth on his flesh. Then he said, God do so and more also to me, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, shall stand on him this day. Wow. What a picture. So it was one thing that you're eating poop, but they are actually eating a little boy, eating the son. Now, I don't know. A lot of Bible teachers say that they assume that the son was dead and that's why they ate him. But if you noticed in that story, she is saying, well, the other lady, after they ate her son, she's saying now the other lady is hiding her son. Well, why would she hide a dead son? She's hiding her son because he's probably alive. So that would mean that, and I don't know, this is subjective, but it seems to me that I don't know if it can be worse. It's bad enough that you're eating your son, but it would be doubly worse if you're killing your son to eat him. So I don't know. It doesn't say that, but why else would you hide your son? I don't know. It could be that you're hiding your dead son. Either way, after hearing this, the king is just brought to his knees. He cannot believe what he just witnessed. Where is his anger directed, though? Elisha. Yes. Yeah. And he proclaims a death sentence on the prophet of God. Notice verse 32 and 33. But Elisha sat in his house, and the elders sat with him. And the king sent a man from before him, but before the messenger came to him, and he said to the elders, Hey, see how this son of a murderer has sent to take away my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door, hold him fast at the door. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him? And while he yet talked with them, behold, the messenger came down unto him, And he said, behold, this evil is of the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? Well, did you notice that Elisha knew they were coming? Did you pick up on that? Mm-hmm. And we've talked about Elisha in these last weeks. He was a very powerful man of God. Recall that he had asked for a double portion of what Elijah had, and God gave it to him. And he is an extremely powerful man of God. God gave him intuition. He realizes that this messenger and the king is coming before they even come. And he tells his elders they're coming. And apparently one is in front of the other. The messenger is going to get there before the king. And so Elisha tells his elders, when the messenger comes, hold fast the door, pin the door, don't let him in. Wait till the king gets here because Elisha has a message for him. Very interesting. So now that we kind of have an idea of what we read in chapter 6, the first two verses of chapter 7 make a lot more sense, don't they? So let's read those two verses again now that we understand the background of chapter 7, verse 1 and 2. Elisha said, this is the messenger. He is now speaking to the messenger and the king that have came to his door. That's who this is directed to. Okay? He tells that messenger, hear you the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Then the Lord on whose hand the king leaned, that's the messenger, answered the man of God and said, behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And Elisha said, you will see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat thereof. Now that has context, doesn't it? Now you understand what he was talking about and why he said it. So let's consider a couple things. Let's just climb into the messenger. The messenger knows that right now a donkey's head is selling for $500. He's aware of that. And the messenger, by the way, is not exempt from any of this. It didn't matter who you were living in Israel at this time. You were affected by this high inflation, if you want to call it that, or the famine or the besiegement. So it didn't matter who you were affected by it. And right now we're dealing with some pretty high prices. Over the last few years, we have seen prices increase substantially. You go to the grocery store and $50 don't buy you a lot. You could buy a couple Walmart bags and be spent $50 easily. And so we've seen inflation. Back in 2020, believe it or not, we were paying $1.50 for gas. That's hard to believe, but we were in 2020. Mm-hmm. So we have really seen, a matter of fact, it's just funny because I was wanting to buy something for an old truck I've got, a part. And I normally know what they sell for. You know what I'm talking about? If you're going to buy something, okay, this is what it sells for. But then you go online and you're like, whoa, why is that double? That's the wrong price. And you start checking around, well, everybody's charging the same price for it. It's not just them. And so if somebody came to you today, you ever met these guys that they always have they know stuff or they think they do. And if somebody told you, hey, tomorrow, gas is going to be $1.50. Would you believe it? Would if somebody told you, hey, when you go to Walmart tomorrow, the prices are going to be about 30% lower than they are today? You would be skeptical, would you not? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't believe it. But here's the thing, though. This guy doesn't either, but this is the prophet of God who has been reliable in everything that he said. Everything that Elisha has said has always been true. This man knows it, and he didn't believe it. And there were going to be consequences for his unbelief. You notice that it said, you shall see it, but you will not what? Yeah. You'll never get to enjoy it. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's going to be true. And I've wondered, why were there consequences? Do you think it could be because he kind of mocked God in his response? Notice he said, if the windows of heaven, in other words, if God himself were to do this. Have you ever heard people use God trivially like that? They'll just say, I'm trying to think of an example of this, but they'll say, even God himself couldn't do that, or they'll just use God's name in vain. That, by the way, that's using God's name in vain. It's not just using God in a cuss word. It's using God's name in a trivial way. And what does the Bible say? You will not be held guiltless that uses God's name in vain. And that includes saying people that are, it's funny that even atheists who don't believe in God use God's name all the time. And the Bible says, be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. And this man essentially mocked God by saying, if the windows of heaven were open, that will not be true. So how would God deliver on his promise? Well, notice verse 3 and 4. There were 4 leprous men sitting or at the gate, that were at the entering of the gate. And they said to one another, why do we sit here until we die? If we say, we will enter into the city, when the famine is in the city, we shall die there. And if we sit still here, we'll die. Now therefore come, and let us just fall into the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall but die. Now let me create the setting here. Don't forget, we've got the Syrians are outside. They've surrounded the city. These 4 lepers are on the outside at the gate. Okay, why are they at the gate? Why are they on the outside and not in the inside? Well, we've talked about lepers before. When you contract leprosy, you are segregated. You are not allowed to be even with your own family. You are pushed outside the city. Not only was it very the trauma was tough on you physically, it had to be tough mentally, emotionally, because you were to be segregated and separated from your family had to be very hard. Not only that, but you had to put on torn clothes, raggedy old clothes, so that people would know. And if they didn't know by that, you had to do something else. What did you have to say?
Unclean.
Unclean. You had to shout, unclean, unclean. So if anybody came by that was near you, you had to let them know you were responsible for telling people, I'm unclean. It's like putting on a mask. You had to let people know, hey, I've got something wrong with me. Don't get near me. So it was very humbling. These people that lived outside the gates, they were at the mercy of people throwing stuff over the wall or people throwing food at them. They had no way. And I would suppose that maybe family members or others might come outside the gate and throw food at them or just provide food for them. But in this situation, their family can't come out. There's no one coming outside these gates. They're by themselves. And after so many days, you're getting pretty hungry. Your body can only last so long without nutrients and sustenance. And so these lepers are at a position where, like, what do we do? So they decided to do something.
But almost, not to take it in a whole, non-serious way, but it's almost like a moment of, Monty Python. It's like, we stay here, we die. We go in there, we die. Let's do this, we die. It's repetitive about, none of the conversation makes sense, what they're doing, but it makes sense, because why not just go in there? What do you have to lose? Might die? Well, we're going to die anyways if we stay out here. But just the way it was written, it's like, man.
One of the things that occurred to me when I read this week.
And actually, my sons too. So.
One of the things that occurred to me when I read this is, these lepers, they're at a spot where they've got to do something. If they go into the city, they're going to die because there's no food in there. If they stay where they are, they're going to die because there's no food outside the gate. So why not just take a chance and go where the enemy is? God puts in us a desire to live. When you are going to fall or trip, what do you naturally do? You put your hand out. Why? Because you don't want to get hurt. You don't even realize it, but you have it's instinct in you. Say again?
Natural instinct.
A natural instinct to want to live. None of us want to die. It's when you see people that want to commit suicide and take their own life, that goes against the natural law of what God has put in us. It's against the instinct. You know, Jared probably deals with some of this. He's a counselor, and I don't know how much you deal with this, you know, with people that might be struggling with suicide. But it goes against what God puts in us. Everything, our body fights to live. We want to live. These lepers are no different. And they're willing to take a chance to live. I looked up the suicide rate in our country today. Yesterday, I was curious of what it was. And by the way, I had taught this lesson, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago in my other church. And I was curious how much different the suicide rates were from when I taught this lesson last. And they went up. Right now, we're showing it, the suicide rate is 14.1 per 100,000 people. It was at 13 a few years ago. The rates are increasing 2% amongst young people every year. There's 134 suicides a day. That's incredible. 134 people will die today from suicide. And man, when you get to a place where you've just lost all hope and you think death is the only way out, there's only one place that comes from, and that's Satan. Because God is life. Satan is death. And Satan is the father of liars, and he lies to these people. So these lepers had nothing to lose because they had nothing. And sometimes that's the best place to be, is when you have nothing. Remember the story of the rich young ruler? The rich young ruler had everything, and he wanted eternal life. He wanted salvation. And he comes to Jesus because he wants that. But in the end, he doesn't get it, does he? Because he refused to give up stuff. Yeah, that was more important to him. And we've got to get to a place where none of that matters. We got to get to where these lepers are. By the way, we are lepers. That's a picture of us. We're sinners. Sin is a picture of leprosy. It's symbolic of leprosy. And yes, sir.
So you just said something which sparked something. So you said we have to become destitute, and so I heard a sermon one time on the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor, and that word is totally destitute in spirit. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and so we can't really enter in until we realize we have nothing to
That's
offer
right.
God.
That's right.
That we are totally destitute and we're totally reliant on him, and that's the only way to enter in. So, that was a good thought.
Yeah, that is a good
Thank
thought.
you.
Yeah. Well, let's see what happens with these lepers. In verse 5. Somebody read verse 5.
And they rose up in the twilight to go unto the camp of Samaritan. And when they come to the utmost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there.
So they decide, they take their thoughts of what they were deciding to do between the four of them, and here they actually do it. The decision they would make would not just affect them, it was going to affect thousands, if not millions, of other people. This verse paints a picture of the setting. Now, let me help you with this, because I may have misled you on what this picture looks like. Remember, I told you that the Samaritans are surrounding the city. Remember that? I told you they're surrounding the walls. But understand, they're not up against the walls. Why wouldn't they be up against the walls? They would be some distance, probably, I would say maybe at least 1,000 yards away from the wall. Why? Why would they be not close to the wall? We talked about this in a recent lesson. Why wouldn't they be near the wall? The Syrians would not want to get too close to the wall, because then what would happen?
Retaliation.
Yes. And there's a lot of ways. The walls were fortified. They were protected by people. There's archers. You could have people shooting arrows, so you got to be within a certain distance of that. Also, boulders, rocks could be thrown at them. Hot boiling oil could be poured if you try to breach the wall. So the Syrian camp it is surrounding the city, but it's some distance from the city. It's out from the city. So the reason I mention that is because in verse 5, you see these Syrians are walking into the camp. So there's a little bit of a walk here. And, I'm thinking, if you're the lepers, you don't know what's coming next. If you're the lepers, you might be expecting an arrow to pierce your chest at any moment in time. They're vulnerable. They have no protection. They're just wearing tattered clothes. So at any moment, you're expecting death. But like we said, they had no choice. At the very least, they expected to be hearing like, halt! Don't go, who goes there? Something. But there's nothing. They just start walking into the camp, and all of a sudden, there's nothing. Look at verse 6 and 7. So they don't see any man there in the end of verse 5. For the Lord, in verse 6, had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said to one another, oh no, the king of Israel has hired against us of the king of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us. Therefore they arose and fled in the twilight, left their tents and their horses and their donkeys and their camp as it was, and they fled for their life. Now this tells you that the camp must have been some distance from the wall, or the lepers would have heard all this commotion. They didn't even know this. So when they walk into this camp, it's creepy. Did anybody remember Twilight Zone? Mm-hmm. I just recently watched every episode of all the Twilight Zones. I just finished them a couple weeks ago. Watched every episode of all, I think 6 or 7 seasons, whatever it was. Might have been 5 seasons. Whatever it was. I watched all of them. And actually, there was a couple I had not seen before. And that's all I watch is old stuff. I watch Columbo, Twilight Zone, Alfred Hitchcock. I never watch anything new. I just live on the old stuff because there's no language and there's no nudity. It's just healthy, So I just what I watch. The first episode of Twilight Zone was, really was one of the best to me. It's my favorite one, because this dude walks into a city and there's no one there. Matter of fact, the name of the episode is Where is Everybody? I don't know if you remember that episode.
Did you wear glasses?
No, you're thinking of...
Library.
Yes, The Librarian. Yes,
there we go.
yes. That's a great one. That's a good one. That one's called Nothing But Time. But I love Twilight
He
Zone.
knows what it's called.
Yes, but the first one is about a man goes into a city and there's like no one there, and then he sees someone and he's excited. There's this lady, and then you realize it's a mannequin. And so, then a movie starts playing at a theater, and he goes in and he's like, the movie had to start playing, and he's just freaked out. In the end, what the whole premise of the story is, he's actually an astronaut that they have put through tests, and they're wanting to prepare him for going on the moon where there's no one. So yeah, that's what it ends up being. But still, it's a really good episode that really drew people into Twilight Zone. Well, that's what these men feel like. They go into this city, they go into this camp, if you will, and it's just like this Twilight Zone episode. It's like everybody just left. Where is everyone? Like, there's a fire going and there's food that was, being prepared, and you can tell people were doing things, and all of a sudden they just left very quickly. That's because God had sent this sound of horses and armies coming, and the Syrians just knew they were toast, and they just abandoned their camp. So these lepers walk into this. God had a plan. Has God ever showed up like that in a really strange way for you? Has God ever done some miraculous thing where you knew it was God? It's a really neat story. Well, let's look at what the lepers do when they go in. Verse 8, when the lepers came to the edge of the camp, they went into one tent and they saw this food, and they ate and they drank, and then they saw the silver and gold and raiment, clothes, and they went and they hid it. And they came and went into another tent. And so they just kept doing this, going from tent to tent. Like, we have hit the jackpot. It's unbelievable. And in verse 9, then they said to one another, we do not well. We're not doing right. This is a day of good news. If we are silent and wait until the morning, then a morning light, then punishment will overtake us. Now therefore come, let us go and tell the king's household. So they came, and they called to the gatekeeper of the city and told them, and said, we came to the camp of the Syrians, and behold, there was no one to be seen or heard there. Nothing but the horses tied and the donkeys tied, and the tents were as they were. Then the gatekeepers called out, and it was told within the king's household. And the king arose in the night and said to his servants, I tell you what the Syrians have done to us. They know that we're hungry. Therefore they have gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the open country, thinking, when they come out of the city, we shall take them alive and get them into the city. Well,
Not that thought.
yeah, it is. Now let's go back to the lepers for a second, though. The lepers go into one tent. They see all this food, and of course they're starving. They haven't ate in quite some time, and they partake of the food, and it was probably cooked because, it was, these people were preparing food. And so their first reaction is to hoard. Did you notice what they did? What did they do?
They hid it.
They hid it. Yeah, it's like, first of all, there's some nice clothes there, and we've talked about clothes in that day and time. People didn't have multiple outfits. Clothes was extremely expensive. They couldn't just buy clothes cheap like we can. And then they see horses that are tied up, donkeys that are tied up, and at first it was like, let's just get as much as we can. But then at some point, their conscience starts to bother them. And they're like, wait a minute. We shouldn't be doing this. And they question their motives of like, well, maybe we should tell someone. We should share the good news. So they go back to the gate and they shout up to the gatekeepers and tell them what's going on. And so the gatekeepers, they go and tell the king. They wake him up at night. They wake him up out of a sleep and tell the king. And the king, of course, is skeptical and says he thinks it's a trap. But notice then what happens in verse 13. One of the king's servants said, well, let us just take 5 of the remaining horses. Let some men take of the 5 remaining horses. By the way, don't miss that. Did you notice that? Let some men take 5 of the remaining horses. Why is that statement significant? They were eating them. There weren't many horses left. So there's only a few horses. So let them take 5 of the remaining horses. Seeing those who are left here will fare like the whole multitude of Israel who have already perished, let us send and see. I love that statement. Let us send and see. So they took 2 horsemen, and the king sent them after the army of the Syrians, saying, go and see. So they went after them as far as the Jordan, and behold, all the way was littered with garments and the equipment that the Syrians had thrown away in their haste. And the messengers returned and told the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Syrians. So a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. Well, I love it that one of the servants, you need a servant. You've got to have people that will say, hey, well, why not? Let's just go see. Let's just see if it's true. Why it doesn't? What would it hurt? And so they do. And did you notice there where it says when they go out, they look and they see all this stuff where the Syrians had left weapons and clothes, and these folks were in a major hurry. That's like one of those. I wish in heaven we could rent a DVD and see that instance of where the Syrians. Well, I would love to just see. I'm trying to picture it in my head, but you look. I don't know how many soldiers and people were talking about in that camp, but it had to be pretty substantial. And so all of them are leaving in a quick hurry. So did you notice at the end of verse 16? What's the end of verse 16 say? So a measure of fine flour was what? Sold for a shekel. And 2 measures of barley sold for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. Now what did it say at the end of verse 2? Somebody read verse 2 again. What did it say in verse 2?
Even if the Lord were to make windows in heaven, could this thing happen? Then he said, behold, you are going to see with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it.
In verse 1, what did he say that a fine flour would sell for? And what would a barley sell for? According to the word of God. Don't ever doubt God. God keeps his promises. If God said it, you can count on it. Oh, the promises of God. Notice verse 17. Now the king had appointed the captain on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. Okay, this is the guy, remember, that came to give him word to Elisha, and Elisha gives him a message. And the people trampled him in the gate. So he died, as the man of God said when the king had came down to him. So at the end of verse 2, what did he say? You'll see it, but you won't eat it. And so, just as God has said, this messenger is trampled by all the people that are trying to get down to the Syrian camp and get all the food and get all the goods that the Syrians had left. We can't miss an important message here about these lepers. I want to come back to these lepers again because there's great significance here about them. Leprosy does not discriminate. I don't know who these 4 lepers were. You know, have you ever noticed that, like, we look at certain people in our world and in our society, and we just have, we assume things.
We judge them.
We do. These lepers, just because they were lepers doesn't mean they were bad people or outcasts before. It doesn't mean they were uneducated. It doesn't mean they were poor. Leprosy doesn't care if you're poor or if you're rich. Remember, I wanted to tell this story, and I still may eventually. I don't know, I may go back. The story of Naaman, the leper. He was a captain. Recall him? He was a wealthy man. Leprosy doesn't care who you are. And we saw, for instance, Bentley die of cancer. Cancer is kind of our leprosy today, I guess, in a way. It doesn't do what it does to people outwardly like leprosy did, where you have parts of your body falling off and things like that. Leprosy is a really terrible disease, and thank God we don't really see leprosy today. But it doesn't care who you are. These 4 lepers, one of them could have been wealthy at one time, could have been very educated. When you looked at him as a leper, though, you didn't think of that. You just saw them for what they were at the time, a leper. And, don't want to be near the leper. Little kids would look at the leper and stare. But sin doesn't discriminate either. The most wealthy man is affected by sin just as much as a drug addict is affected by sin. We look at drug addicts. Sometimes we think, if they just would get off that drug. But they have leprosy. We are affected by it too. We may have different forms of it, but we're all affected by sin. Sin doesn't care what your background is, or what your last name is, or what neighborhood you grew up in. Sin affects all of us. We all deal with sin every day. And we all have to repent of sin. And every morning I ask God, I put on my armor and I say, God, keep me from sin today. Keep my mind pure today. Create in me a clean heart, O God, just like David prayed.
But I think I talked about with the pastor at our last church, primarily I guess referring to my 2 sons and talking about we were raised, and they were too, much in that Calvinistic, you follow the rules. It was more rules than relationship.
Legalistic, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think of that a lot of the time, like even when I was young, when you would find out something happened to somebody, your thoughts were, well, what was their sin? What did they do?
Yes,
right,
yes.
Which is a very Old Testament kind of thought.
Yeah, it is.
And I think somewhere from my generation into what I call our kids, the lost generation, they were raised one way and now they don't believe that. Somewhere we've missed the mark on explaining the relationship side of it. We haven't gone, like me, even as a mom, to go back and say, it's not just about right or wrong, did you do this, did you do that? It's about having a relationship. It was probably before anyways, before COVID, but I remember getting baptized again because I came to the realization that had spent far too much of my life worrying about what my dad thought of me, my earthly father, instead of what my godly father thought of me. And that's kind of the where I think that we've missed that mark.
Yeah.
And sort of in this situation where, you know, there's nothing there, what should we do? And they argue back and forth. It makes you wonder sometimes, were the people that were lepers, did they know God? Did they have a relationship?
Oh, I'm
Obviously,
sure.
they knew something. They knew
Yeah.
they were doing wrong.
Yeah.
But it's still very much, like you said, Old Testament. But I think as a society, we've missed that mark.
Yeah, and by the way, God would use leprosy as a punishment. Matter of fact, in the story of Naaman, after he's healed, we see Gehazi, Elisha's servant. I don't want to give away the whole story because I think I want to tell it sometime. But Gehazi ends up with leprosy that Naaman had. So God will use leprosy as a punishment, but it's not always. But just real quickly here, sin is very symbolic of leprosy. Just as leprosy affects people physically, emotionally, mentally, so sin does too. And we are all unclean before we come to know God. We are segregated. We are segregated from God, separated, just as we're lepers, and we were unclean. And just as the lepers, they came to the camp and they saw all this stuff that they didn't deserve, and they saw the food and everything that they needed to sustain themselves. We too, at times, God provides for us out of His grace and mercy. We don't deserve it. The lepers didn't deserve it. We don't deserve it. But what I love, my favorite part about this story, and you can question the motives of why the lepers decided to do this, but they say, well, we don't need to keep this to ourselves. It wouldn't be right. Maybe they were superstitious. Whatever. You can question their motives, but what I don't care about is that they did go back and they told the gatekeeper, and the northern kingdom was able to benefit from what God had provided when the Syrian army was sent packing, so to speak. And they shared the gift that God had given them. And we were lepers once, and we were healed. We were unclean, but now we're clean. And we should do no less than what the lepers did. We should share the good news. Who are we to think that God gave us the gift of salvation, and now we are clean? And we've shown the high priest, they had to come before the priest and say they're clean. And when we're clean, the high priest looks at us and he says, he's clean. And we are clean before God. Not to say that we don't still deal with sin. We do. But we are clean before God. We've been redeemed. And we don't have any right to hoard or to think that we shouldn't share the gift that God has given us. We should be like these 4 lepers and go and tell. Think about your own salvation, for instance. How did you come to know Christ? Probably because somebody shared what God had given to them. God gave them a healing from leprosy or sin, and now you are the beneficiary of that. And it's our job to tell someone else, share the gift of salvation with someone else. And I hope God puts someone in your life this week that is a leper, that needs to hear the good news of the gospel. It's our job. It's our responsibility to share. I know that people, there's this old statement about, I forget how it goes, to live your life, and if necessary, use words. Use words. Use words. Yeah, you can let your life be a testimony, but man, you're going to be a lot more impactful when you tell somebody. If somebody's burning in a house, you can wish or think if they should get out, but no, you scream it out. Get out. You use your words, and that's what we should do. Just like these lepers did. They went and shouted to the gatekeepers and said, hey, there's food down there, and they're gone. And we should share the good news of the gospel. Any other thoughts on this story today?
Leprosy is still around today.
Yeah.
I was speaking with our chief medical officer a while back, and something came up about leprosy. And he said someone came in a while back, and I was kind of baffled and tested it. It was leprosy, but we have a healing for leprosy now.
Yeah.
The cure.
Because it was still around.
It is still around.
Wow.
Yeah.
But
Well, thank you for listening. I appreciate you being here this morning.